two phenomenal individuals this morning, one of whom I've known for 10, 11 years. I think Kim and I connected way back when. And Kurt and I just connected about 8 months ago, about maybe a year ago. Yeah, with our search that we did.
Yeah,
exactly.
Even further, but we can't. Who's tracking?
That's true. Yes, I'm kind of lost track of what day it is. Never mind what year it is. So it's great. So we're going to have a very lively conversation around diversity hiring. Both these individuals are building out organizations. They've also come from larger companies. We'll talk about that also as we go through the discussion this morning. So Kim, why don't you start? If you can give us a little kind of feedback, if you will, or insight about what you're doing today with Founders First, and kind of what you're seeing out there also.
Sure. So I'm Kim Folsom. I'm the founder, chairperson, and CEO of Founders First. And we are a platform that's focused on growing businesses led by diverse founders. On one side, we're a small business growth accelerator. So think about like the top tech accelerators in the Bay Area that help grow tech companies. And on the one side, but we focus on diverse-led businesses that are largely either service or manufacturing. And then on the other is we are like a structured finance or private equity firm. So we provide direct funding and advisory support to help grow these businesses. Our mission is to help grow them so they're the largest job creators and wealth creators for the underserved communities that we serve. We're a national platform. We're based here in San Diego, but our focus is national. We have a presence not only just in California, Texas, Illinois, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And I came to this work because, as I was telling one of the gentlemen back here, Founders First is my seventh startup, if you will. We're 6 years old. We've worked with over 550 employees.
I was saying that Founders First is my seventh company that I started. We started 6 years ago. We've worked with over 500 companies. We have 3 institutional credit facilities that we deploy into the market to fund our businesses, about $110 million in committed capital. Our model is a little different in that on the one side, we're focused on growing diverse companies and not helping them start, but grow when you think about from that standpoint. So the companies we work with are revenue generating. They generally have anywhere from 2 to 20 employees. And our goal is to help them get on the path of adding 2 to 5 employees on a yearly basis. Our funding that we provide them is anywhere from $50,000 to $300,000 in an initial investment, and it can go up to $1 million. Our funding model is a little different. It's, if you ever watch the show Shark Tank, the bald guy in the middle, Mr. Wonderful, we use that model to fund the growth of these companies. It's been exciting. I came into this, as I shared, this is my 7th company. My prior 6 companies were all tech businesses. I started in the crazy .com era in the mid-90s. Where there wasn't a whole lot of diversity and inclusion as far as entrepreneurial companies. And the interesting thing, that was some 25 plus years ago. There's still, when you look at the growth of businesses that are the job creating businesses, I mean, all of you, maybe you guys know that small business and entrepreneurship is the driving force behind job creation in the country. But when you look at the actual founders and owners of those businesses, there's not very much diversity. There's a lot of people starting businesses and are nascent lifestyle businesses, but when you really look at the job creators and those types of things, there's not that much of a group. And so our mission at Founders First is to grow that group. And I came into doing this from my own journey through 6 tech companies that I started, exited 3, and said there's an opportunity. While we do focus on diverse-led businesses, it's a pretty wide umbrella. Women, people of color, military veteran, LGBTQ, and those in smaller communities, 2nd and 3rd tier cities is our focus. So it's a pretty inclusive group, but our mission is to grow the inclusive economy with what we're doing. And I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Fantastic. Very good. And if you didn't see also, there's a great article about Kim and her company in TechCrunch from 2 weeks ago, I want to say. All right. So it's kind of neat. Was it kind of surreal to have your face up on the,
oh my gosh,
the big building in Times Square?
It's crazy because when I started this, people were like, "Are you crazy? You could be doing this with tech companies," and it's like, yeah.
Exactly
So,
right.
yeah.
That's great. Well, congrats.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here. All right, Kurt.
I don't
Talk
have
about
anything
include-
interesting to say after Kim spoke,
Yeah.
so I'm glad the first part, her mic was off.
It's a lot of pressure to follow that.
Yeah. Well, so I guess I'll start by saying, so as Kim is focused more on the earlier stage side for growth, I'm trying to position my firm, Include Capital, on the more medium stage of that. So for the last 2.5 years, we've heard of so many companies, especially in the Fortune 500 S&P, that have essentially dedicated what I call DEI funds to really providing funding into underserved communities. And because the fact is that if you want to start a company, then typically use your friends and family dollars. The underserved communities don't have the friends and family dollars that it takes to actually get your company up and going. When you start thinking about the lost income, you have families, right, on and on and on. These things we know that are intuitive to us, but a lot of times, especially my guess is in this room, we don't often think about the challenges that actually exist because we're not in those communities. And a lot of times I think through, and I use the example, maybe just for some engagement, could you raise your hand if you have an iPhone? And hopefully this does not backfire on me. Yeah, and we think that...
It's usually me and Kevin the only ones that have droids. So.
Yeah, and we think that most of our friends also have iPhones, right? Because, well, they do, and we know when they text us when you have a different color that pops up, and usually that doesn't happen. And I use that example because iPhones is only about 30% of the market, right? So there's 70% of the market that we don't intuitively think exists, right? Unless if you're odd like Ken. and so I use that just because like we think about what's in front of us, right? And so when we only think about what's in front of us, there's a whole world that's missing behind us. And so Include Capital is approaching this from a strategy perspective of we are searching for middle market companies in which are owned by founders from underrepresented communities, or in conjunction with operating partners from underrepresented communities that can go in and acquire middle market companies, generally between $20 million and $100 million of revenue. We're also providing growth cap into minority-owned companies as well. And while I believe that this is the right thing to do, and I think most of us would agree with that, the challenge that has existed today for asset allocators, money managers, those that are chief investment officers of pension funds, is that they've been beaten over the head with a DEI conversation really heavily for the last 2 or 3 years, but really for the past 10. And they're saying, we don't know how to find investments that are minority-led, that can generate the returns that we have a fiduciary duty to provide to our stakeholders, right? So retirees, pension funds are a big provider of capital. And so what I found was there's actually a strategy that we can bring to these individuals that want to do what's right. There's a fiduciary duty that they believe prevents them from doing what's right. And so by bringing a unique strategy, and the basis behind the strategy is that, so we know the headlines, we know the research, and so given that most of the private equity professionals, asset managers, let's be honest, right? Most of them are white males, and that's starting to shift today. And I'm not suggesting that there's anything wrong with that, but I think what is wrong with that is if it doesn't change, and that's going to be, I think that's the obligation of all of us. And there's not only the right thing to do, but there's also, I think, a capitalistic reason to do it. And so by actually focusing on the space and not what's just in front of us, we can actually explore opportunities that are being missed because private equity, for example, typically you're operating in the circles in which you navigate. Those are country clubs, those are the World Economic Forum, those are organizations in which there's a lot of other white males. And then this is, again, me not standing up here and saying being a white male is a bad thing. Half of me is a white male, the other half is Native American and Japanese. And so I believe that there's a market opportunity to penetrate circles and networks that aren't right there in front of us. So it's supply and demand dynamics. So if you're seeking out organizations that are minority-led, that are off the radar of your typical private equity network, you don't have the same competition to enter into that market and provide the value to that company, right? So the valuations are a bit more rationalized. But you are working with companies in which have just broken through so many barriers, right, that exist and have made it beyond that $10 million in revenue mark, right, without the same advantages that so much of the rest of the U.S. population has had, especially in the investment world. So that's essentially the premise of bringing the strategy that exists to continue to help to promote minority-led companies and other diverse operating talent to enter into this space. What really got me thinking about this, and I'll close out here, what really got me thinking about this is over the last couple of years, I've been fortunate to have been invited to serve on a couple of rather influential boards. One is the Board of Trustees for my alma mater, Western Michigan University, back in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and then also for a large wealth management and trust company that's based out of Grand Rapids that services a lot of the very wealthy families and individuals that are throughout the West Michigan region. Why West Michigan? I split my time between Grand Rapids, Michigan and Carlsbad out here.
Mostly you come out here when you want to have some fun.
Mostly out in Carlsbad during the winter.
Enjoy
and
the
then
weather.
Get a little more time out there. And but that happened because there were some white males that said, I'm on this board, we need diversity in this board because we're starting to get criticized for it. Mm-hmm. But what got me really excited is that these friends had said, but we also need diverse viewpoints. And you have shown through what my previous role was, CEO of an investment firm that I co-founded called Gun Lake Investments, which is owned by the Gun Lake tribe, which I'm a tribal citizen of. We became one of the largest minority-owned investment firms that focus on promoting the minority-owned asset space. And so it really woke me up to what are the possibilities, because even though we are a minority-owned firm, and I myself, come from a Japanese and Native American background, as well as a white background, it's just hard. And it's hard because we're looking in this direction, because we have search costs, we have networks, we have friends, we have relationships. And until you start to get out of your comfort zone, you're not going to find these other opportunities. And we learned that at Gun Lake Investments. And so instead of just focusing on the Native community, which will be part of Include Capital, but it's broadening that search to all underrepresented communities and seeing where it goes. And so I've not closed on a fund yet. I left Gun Lake Investments in July, immediately started that activity. There's been a lot of momentum, but it is a new conversation and a new strategy. And I have all the belief in the world that we can make it work. But it is definitely groundbreaking. I realized this morning that I tend to break all the rules. So this is my first public presentation. So last night I had a couple of glasses of bourbon. I filled up on caffeine this morning. I didn't eat breakfast and I didn't get a lot of sleep. But
that's the best way to come to a panel.
I'm really excited that you guys let me sit up here and be next to Kim. Yeah, so
great.
Thank you.
No, thank you. That's great. Any questions so far? How are we doing? Good? Vic, good? Okay. So one of the things, and both of you talked about this in similar ways, but also in different ways, is the definition of diversity. What is DEI, right? And I'm curious about how each of you are approaching that in the marketplace. You just secured a recent round of funding yourself as well. So I'm curious, I guess, two things. A, are you leading with the description of those 5 different minority populations that you share with us, or are you waiting for them to ask? Right? In other words, are they expecting or assuming it's going to be one way or the other? And then for yourself, coming across as a white male, do you then have to kind of go out of your way and say, I am half Japanese and Native American, so I do understand the minority world also? I'm curious about how you're both kind of approaching that.
So I would go through and say, I could put it in 2 buckets. One, just in my own, I started my first company in the mid-90s because that was the only way I could get to the leadership role. Yeah, sure. And that, interesting enough, still is the same issue for women and people of color, is to be able to get access to the C-suite. You're going to start something on your own. So that was one. But the other, I just wanted to solve big problems. But I found that, and the other, kind of route that I got into, back to what Kurt mentioned about, different, kind of buckets. I was a software engineer by training. So, I was in the industry that typically is, white males. Those are the guys that I was in AP classes with in high school and in college. Those were my colleagues. And I wanted to do the same things they did. We all wanted to be Bill Gates. That just shows my age. We all wanted to be Bill Gates, and we're like, thought what he did, because he's, the age, the college, and all this other stuff. But then when we went to start our careers, I started my career as a software engineer at NCR developing ATM and point of sale system infrastructure, and thought, what, I should have the same opportunity as my colleagues did, because, they were, and at the time, interestingly enough, they had a DEI initiative. Now, really? DEI is not, this is the new name, but if you go back other decades, there's always been a DEI initiative. And in fact, how I got introduced to DEI is through my dad. My dad was a Vietnam veteran who came to California to be stationed here to work on a project for Admiral Zumwalt to integrate the Navy in the 70s. And that was my first exposure to DEI in the 70s. And if you go through and look, every decade we've had a new version of DEI.
Repackaging.
Exactly. Yeah. And the reality for them, they looked at the fact that they're going from a draft, mandatory draft, to a voluntary draft. And when they looked at the performance of their soldiers, that they needed to be able to do the business of the Defense Department by it being more inclusive, and not just having them in the lower ranks, but having them in leadership roles. And it was that initiative that spawned, like, Colin Powell and all these other people, because that was like some, a long time ago. And so, looking at, kind of fast forward, 50 years from then, I look at it, when I just launched Founders First, it was from a standpoint of there are, a degree of representation, marginalization of different groups, and that there are some commonalities and that can help serve the market. So looking at the social mission of what we do, but then the other side of it, as Kurt brought up, the economic side of it, is that it just like in the defense of the country, it's good for defending the country if it represents the whole citizenry. The same is for the economic, the private economic component of our country. But it's not, people don't have that same sense of urgency that was in the government. Because the reality is, it's like, it's used a similar analogy to what Kurt used. Imagine if we only play with only a certain group of people. There's so many industries that have embraced diversity, like our professional sports industry, and it's so much better than where it was before. And so it's really having folks look at it and as opposed to or, and that we are a better and stronger country and economy when it is inclusive. And so that's been the way that I have gone about it, is that, being somebody in elementary school and seeing, oh my gosh, okay, I see what happened with the military. And for them, it was like either you embrace it or you're out, regardless of what rank you were, because that's what they needed to defend the country. And I wish we had the same, recognition, because when you look at other countries, they don't have as much heterogeneous makeup as we do in the U.S. I travel a lot with all the companies I have, and this is what makes us so strong. We are a young country, and we have fought through so many things, but this has not been one thing that we've been able to embrace enough. And when we do, just like the military, we'll be okay.
Yeah. I'm amazed also. There's been research out for 10, 15 years, and every year it comes back with the same results, that the companies that have a more diverse executive team, not just the board, but also an executive leadership team, they outperform
Oh,
the
yeah.
S&P
That's-
by 15, 18, sometimes 20%, depending upon the
The
year.
latest
It's so
results
consistent.
from Goldman and McKinsey is it's up to 30%.
30%, yeah, exactly.
You know, but
right.
the ones that go through and do it in all these different pockets, and then you look at some of the companies like Disney. Disney has gone through from board all the way down to their product offering. Their movies
Right.
are inclusive
Right,
because
exactly.
they recognize that they're able to attract the whole viewing audience, not just one
Right, exactly.
segment.
Well, that's where it comes back to the economic side. I mean,
It's-
we should be doing it just in general for just,
Let's
as humans.
recognize
but look
that
at just
we-
the economic side.
Exactly,
yeah. Because
exactly.
you have more diversity of thought, you have more ideas, more perspectives. As I talk about all the time, my whole team, it's myself, and I have 6 women on my team. And, the perspectives that I get from them, including Vicky in the back here, is so different than if I had myself and 6 other white males. It just is, right? And so things that I think are priorities or things that I think are going to be relevant for the audience are different when you have different people that are giving you that input and that feedback. So that makes us a better organization as a whole versus just 6 other clones of me. That's a big difference. So Kurt, how about yourself?
Yeah, well, let me piggyback on an example, and then I'll answer your question. When I started Gun Lake Investments, first it was just me and a laptop in a co-working space. It wasn't much of a company. And then as we grew, because of the focus on the Native American community, I added 2 Native Americans. The board was all Native American, and then the ownership was obviously Native American through the tribe. And then as we started interviewing and hiring, we hired a couple of white people. And after about 6 months, it was really interesting. And there was on an employee engagement survey, there was a comment about essentially how they felt like an outcast. And I knew who it was. We were a small firm. And to actually address, a white male about them feeling a bit discriminated against because they weren't Native American really opened my eyes to the power of diversity or the lack of diversity or the issues, right? And so this is just 2 years ago. And so it's easy to see how it can go the other way the other way. And one thing we don't talk about, I don't think enough, is that diversity includes everybody.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And on my board for Include, while we're growing it, but there's a white male on it. Why? Because this individual is passionate about the space, understands the issues, and has great experience that Include can benefit from. Diversity doesn't mean excluding white people, and it doesn't mean excluding males, right? It doesn't, right? It's about ensuring that we have that kind of comprehensive viewpoint.
Right.
And so for Include, the way that our focus is on racial diversity primarily because I have a way to work that directly into the strategy and have an activity system that builds around that. And while we are kind of generally focused on diversity as a whole, we're taking a kind of broad definition of diversity in terms of ethnicity, but we're not including kind of a class outside of an ethnic or racial kind of background.
Gotcha.
And that's not because we're excluding anybody. Again, we still need diversity. And so the hiring is not going to exclude anybody. It's not going to be focused just on minorities. But in terms of being able to communicate to the market about what it is that we're doing, and this is a big part of it because it is so new, we decided to focus directly on more of that kind of ethnic or racial background,
Gotcha.
as opposed to expanding it further. But the same principles that apply to how do we expand our networks and relationships apply beyond the racial and ethnic backgrounds that we have to do. I myself have not done that yet because as we were talking, about there could be 25 priorities, and especially with startups, right? Everything you do could be done better. And so let's focus on what it is that we're doing extremely well and then expand from that. I think one of the reasons why it hasn't happened, we know the economic impact for the country. We know the capitalistic motivations, right, as investors and business people. But one of the reasons why I believe it hasn't happened is because a lot of us are just, I venture to say embarrassed, right, and not know how to approach it, right? And I myself, I mean, I was embarrassed when I realized a year and a half ago, a year ago, we went out to hire for a COO. This was the second time that we had gone out at Gunlink Investments. So I guess about a year and a half to 2 years ago. And of the about approximately 100 resumes we received for a COO, there's only 3 diverse candidates. All 3 were Native American. And actually, one turned out to be the most qualified candidate. But what was interesting to me is I had thought, because we are minority owned and we promote the minority space, that we're going to get diverse candidates. The fact is that I was naive and a bit ignorant to think, well, I've not built relationships beyond the Native American community. That was also something that inspired me to build something that's a bit more inclusive beyond just the Native American community. And gave me the space to explore, how do I do this? But I was embarrassed that, that my friend network, it wasn't diverse outside of the Native American community. And I was embarrassed not to know how to do it. And I was embarrassed to raise my hand and ask, how is it that I do this?
Right, yeah.
I'll end this with, there's an individual named, I think, Mav Carter, who's the business manager for LeBron James. Everybody knows who LeBron James is. Mav is actually the person who's making LeBron James more money than what he's making in basketball. And early in the pandemic, the New York Times did a podcast with him. And the other part about this sense of embarrassment is he points out that we're beaten over the head with the term racism. And we all know that racism exists, but we also know that there's some good people that aren't necessarily racist, but they have bias. We all have bias, all of us, right? And that bias prevents us from seeing beyond what's in front of us unless we actually work to break down that bias. He makes the point, it gets us to the same exact place. Whether it's bias or it's true racism, it gets us to the same result. He goes, so we have to recognize that we have bias that's preventing us from doing this, which puts us into an uncomfortable position, which I believe is part of the reason why the U.S. has not moved faster to become more inclusive. That's what, I'm an optimist by nature. I want to believe that's true. But we have the ability, all of us in this room have the ability to show how it can be done, why it should be done, and empathize with those that want to make it happen, but don't necessarily know how to.
Right, exactly. Well, and to your point before, Kim, also, as we all know, the majority of new jobs that are created out there are created by small businesses. So yes, it's great for Microsoft and for Disney to have a more diverse board and executive team, but the reality is that's a very tiny microcosm, and it's not going to have a huge impact other than maybe looking better and making it more okay, if you will. But it's up to all of us to really make those differences and to hire people that don't look like us. When it comes down to it, at the end of the day, it's much easier to hire somebody that looks and sounds like you, has a similar background, similar schooling, because you feel like you have that comfort level, right? But to really push yourself out of that comfort zone, to hire somebody who looks and sounds and it's all about different things than what you are, it's hard to do. But we have to push ourselves to do it.
Can I give another stat on that?
Yeah.
So again, a reason why, beyond just it's the right thing to do, right? And I truly believe it. I think most of us in the room, if not all, also believe that to be true. So in the S&P 500, amongst the executives, about 34% of the executives in the S&P 500 have DEI as a kind of heavily weighted component of their incentive compensation. 34%. And that goes as high as 54% within the financial industry. And so if people are getting compensated to enhance their DEI, promote DEI, that's not just within their own firms, it's also within supplier diversity programs. This is the thing that's going to last and is going to have an impact on all of our own compensation, progression, and success in our own careers. And just another reason why we have to figure this out. Personally, there's individual incentive because we're all selling to companies that, at minimum, selling to companies that are selling to companies that are being compensated for this. And this whole chain is going to become measured, especially as data becomes much easier to obtain, within their own personal scorecards.
Sure. Yeah. So Kim, I'm curious about something you said earlier. I guess we were both all talking about is it's one thing to say we want to do this. We want to enhance our DEI hiring. It's another thing to figure out, okay, how do we actually make it happen? How do we actually get out there? On the recruiting side, for example, we have clients that tell us they want to bring in a diverse candidate. And then we go through the job description, and the job description says they want someone with 25 years of experience in their industry. Well, and like we were talking about earlier, a lot of industries have been male-dominated for a long time. So if you're trying to hire a CEO or a COO, and you want somebody from your industry, but you also want diversity hiring, those things don't work together. You've got to be willing to make a change and look outside the box, so to speak, at different schools, at different backgrounds, outside of that friends and family group, to truly proactively find diversity candidates. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you find diversity or minority-owned businesses if the traditional places to look may not be as obvious?
It's, you hit the nail on the hammer, something that I was actually sharing with our team at our team meeting yesterday. If you look at the products and services that have been sold to the folks that primarily get bucketed into diverse, women and people of color, it's been more consumer marketing than it has been business to business, services. So we partner with affinity groups that collaborate with business owners that are led by diverse owners. But that's some of the new thing that you have to go through and do. Is there's not, like, if you ask yourself, how can you market to a diverse client base to attract them, and representation matters.
Right.
If you're trying to sell to women, which we influence 90% of purchases, just having all guys in the buying experience, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But that hasn't been caught on yet. You still go to buy things, and it's like there's an assumption, well, do you have a husband or dad or something? Right. And the same with regards to the other side. So that's how we have gone through and done this, and we're having to recreate the wheel a little bit, because making certain that you have the empathy and recognize and respect people where they are is an important component of that. Building that trust that you can go through and do it. But we go through and have relationships with a number of organizations, be it chamber of councils, and all this other stuff. And I have leveraged quite a bit of the Friends of Kim's, Partners of Kim, to help foster that journey. But there are, as Kurt was mentioning, there's a lot of, Fortune 500 companies that all of a sudden put their stake in the ground by DEI, use, the clip art to say, okay, all of a sudden we are going through something with diversity, but nothing beyond that,
right, exactly.
And you have to.
It's very disingenuous. Yeah,
my gosh,
it
is.
Kind of window dressing.
Right. I mean, and some of these major businesses, they use the same clip image, so you can go and look on their website, and you would think the same woman is like at all these different places.
Exactly right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and we talk with clients also about, even things as simple as job descriptions. No one would think that a job description is going to be biased, but many of them are. The fact that you require, quote unquote, a 4-year degree, for example. Well, if you look at the stats out there, less than 30% of Black and Native American and Hispanic professionals have degrees, right? So you just lopped off 70% of your potential audience for that job because you said that you want to have you're requiring a 4-year degree, which is, and a lot of jobs these days don't really require a 4-year degree. Some do, but a lot of them don't.
Well,
so a little thing like that, just being aware of how that bias is going to affect the pool of candidates.
And I would also say, going back to something you both have mentioned, you're going to have to expand that network, because when you look at women of color, they are some of the most educated folks in the market.
Sure.
So it is going to be going to what are some of the schools and universities that have alumni that you can be able to collaborate, tap into.
Right.
Because the other thing with regards to the inclusive economy, the metrics that you hear about as far as the unemployment rate and all of those pieces that's at an aggregate level that represent mostly guys.
Right.
But if you go and look at women and other sub-segment of the population, there's opportunities. But it's just, again, going back to what Kurt mentioned, it's going beyond the immediate pieces. And when you think about your strategy to build your network, it's going through and saying, you know what, maybe it's once a month I'm gonna go and make a point of finding an opportunity to expand your network, to build your source of colleagues, things that you support that increases your exposure to that diversity.
Yeah, that's great. Are we doing questions? Any burning questions that you guys have? Yeah, Mike.
Kim, I think you gave a perfect example of going up through school and being the only woman in your class. How does that impact the opportunity to hire the people? So, or is there an issue with qualified candidates in biotech, for example, based on your example? How do you address that?
So I'll repeat the question just for our virtual audience. So the question is, are you able to, is it hard to find women out there or people of color as well in certain industries that are largely underrepresented, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, I'm old. So when I graduated, yes, I was the only woman of color. There are more, but then you also have to look at, going back to, there are more universities that have a bigger, have some initiatives that, for example, there's one school, this is one, but others do, Northeastern. They have a program that specifically targets women to help them go into STEM careers, and they provide a really great program to help them either pursue a master's in, could be data science or computer science and those types of things. So there are a number of universities that recognize there is that gap to be able to attract that talent. And then the other thing, as a undergrad, because of this kind of underrepresentation thing, it can be a hard experience, because you're having to go through this by yourself. Some majors, I mean, all of you can think about your issue and your experience in college. There are some times where it's like, well, wouldn't it be easier for you to be not to call out any people, but instead of being, and I'm so old, they didn't even call it STEM, instead of being a technical degree or engineering degree, why don't you consider being a social science or English or something of that sort, because you're going to have access to more diverse students there than not. But there are more programs, since I graduated. I mean, UCSD has, more programs than they used to before. But it is taking that initiative to say, you know what, you guys have these initiatives. You've graduated X number of people. What can we do to get access to those graduates? Because many of those folks are looking for chances to advance. And the reality is, most of the time for diverse candidates, their way of advancing is not necessarily working at one company. They may more of the time advance by, I've been in this role for whatever, 2-5 years. For me to advance, I may have to look at an opportunity at someplace else.
And Mike, let's be honest, most companies don't do leadership development and recruiting extremely well, right? Most firms are thinking, okay, I need someone. Kim just left, and we have to fill her spot right now. Now what do we do? Now a process starts. When we know the right way to do it is you have to invest in the process right along the way, and that starts at the top, and usually it starts at the board level. But you need a CEO, right? And that creates a really great culture of promoting within. And so once you identify an organization or a university, that could help with, with your own DEI initiatives. You also have to invest into that organization to build the relationships. They want to make sure that you're coming from a genuine spot, and not just because you want a minority female to come into the company, right? Because this is never about hiring solely on the basis of a minority. This is still about finding the best candidate, but you expand that pool. This is a hard lesson that we learned at GunLink Investments as we started this. There's an organization called the National Minority Supplier Diversification Council, which is kind of the national arbiter of who's a minority-owned company and who's not. And it took a long time to build a relationship with the Michigan regional office to be able to get any sort of kind of mind share from them. And then you think about universities and how they're just a conglomerate of colleges and resources and seniorities, right? And you have to find the people that really want to make it happen, and that takes some time. So you have to get ahead of it in order to get the results that you truly want. But it's tough because we're all so busy, and those are benefits down the road versus benefits today. So as much of it is a cultural and mind shift, as what it is an actual kind of step forward.
And I would have, with one of the boards that I'm on, it really is important for the most senior leadership in the board to have that as an initiative for the CEO and their performance, that they're expanding what they're doing, and to make certain you have the entire pool of talent. And then the other side of it is, to something Kurt mentioned, to some of the major companies that are hiring these diverse candidates, go through and say, well, gosh, we hire them, we went through all this trouble, and they don't stay. And it's like, if you end up going through this exercise where it's constant, well, I'm just going to hire one person.
Right, check that box.
I'm going to check that box, I'm going to hire that one person, and I'm going to go through and say, yeah, we got a diverse candidate. Look, that is not a great experience for them, and they're gonna leave. You're hiring them because of their capabilities. And back in my day in the corporate environment, there used to be much more, professional development, employee development, leadership development. And so to Ken's point, you're going to have to share how you're going to develop that talent in order to retain that talent, and have it be that when you think about your organization, it's not just one person. There's a lot of research around, if you're gonna, and you're seeing this on board makeup, if you're gonna add those diverse candidates, have a few and have a strategy of how you're going to add. As you're growing your business, you're going to be adding talent. It should be an ongoing thing. It shouldn't just be that you're just hiring the one and it's like, okay, I got my trophy and now I'm done, because then you won't have them stay. The other is they have so much to contribute. I tell you, there's so many companies that just, my personal experience where I was the check on the box to them, and it was like, okay, I have this amount of time that I'm going to stay, because the reality is, I am here to contribute just like my other colleagues, and I want to be treated like I am contributing just like my other colleagues. That's super important. That gets to the whole empathy related thing, and recognizing the contribution of your employee, as opposed to just that they're a bright, shiny object that's helping this initiative that you have.
And has anybody read the book Execution by Larry Bossidy? Larry Bossidy was former CEO of Allied Signal and Honeywell. And I'm reading it because I'm trying to be more honest with audiences. So hopefully, this comes across as a very honest and hopefully I'm not insulting anybody from the diversity standpoint. But he makes a point in the book that, going back to most companies hiring and recruiting and developing poorly, because they're looking at the things on their resume that we have historically thought were, the qualifiers for somebody to be successful. The school name, the program, the years of experience, for example. And he makes the argument in the book that, that although, of course, all these things are important, but what truly comes down to find a good hire is how have they executed in the past? Minority candidates, generally speaking, have had to persevere, right, in a more challenging environment than non-minority candidates. And if they're able to execute in those environments, and this is part of my premise with, if a minority-owned company is in the middle market, if they've exceeded 10 million in revenues with the challenges that exist today, they know how to persevere. And at the end of the day, we need individuals that can persevere in order to execute, because the game is only getting more difficult. And the rules are, the playbook has gone out the window, right? And the pandemic has only reinforced that and maybe accelerated that. And so I think it's more about asking different questions to understand not just who has achieved a 4-year undergrad from a top-tier school, but how have you executed in life? Yeah. So it's just changing the way that we think. and this is myself included, right? And I think, again, I'll reiterate, I did this process poorly, and I've been spending a lot of time thinking about how do we do it differently.
Yeah. Well, and it's a great point that you both bring up as well. And we have discussions with clients all the time where it's about, we can bring you a superstar candidate, but if we put that superstar into a broken system, they're not going to survive. They're not going to last very long. They're going to be there for a year, get their vesting, and then they're going to bail, right? Same kind of thing when it comes to diversity, right? If you check the box and hire one diversity candidate, bring them into a culture that's not very supportive, that's not listening of other people, that's not going to give women or people of color a chance to have their say and contribute, that person's not going to last very long. It's the same kind of thing. So it's got to be a systemic change in an organization, not just a check the box, hire one person kind of a thing, which is true. So switching gears a little bit, let me know, I'm curious about what you saw at CES. You just came back from Vegas, right? And I know obviously we had a couple of years off or a year off because of COVID. Are you, either at CES or in general, are you seeing more diversity among people out there? Are you seeing more people of color at these kinds of events where there is that deliberate goal to diversify and expand networks?
That's so funny that you mentioned that. So I have been on the board at CTA before and got to know the CEO and would give him a hard time about, come on. And we, as part of the board's makeup, we would go, we would have some of our board meetings in the US and some of our board meetings would be in other countries. And when I would go to some of these other countries, it was like, I'm going to bring a girlfriend with me because I want someone to know I'm not a mirage. I am in this other country, and I am in this other country with 50 other white guys.
Right.
And so I would give him a bit of a hard time about so much innovation that this organization has put forth, innovating the inclusion of diversity would be so important. And now I will say that they have, in my, 16 plus years being involved with the industry, it is much more diverse than it has been. But it's diverse from a few different, pieces. One has just been the expediency and evolution of technology. The speed of the cell phone has got, what do they talk about? The speed of semiconductors has driven the adoption of computers and the internet and smartphones that has driven all this other type of innovation. And so as a result, CES used to be more about consumer electronics than it was other things. And now computers and everything, from cars to homes and all this other stuff. So they have had that diversity. And then the other side of it is the manufacturers are the large, exhibitors and drivers there. It's not just U.S. companies. It is a lot of companies. I mean, they have a significant amount of international representation there. So you have that, diversity over the years. And then the other, reality for CTA is they got some bad press about how not their lack of inclusivity, 4 or 5 years ago. And, sometimes that's how people change, and they made that adoption. They actually have, increased their intentionally, and it's at the board level and also at the, the executive level, and some of the initiatives they have to intentionally have a much more diversity inclusion as part of their innovation strategy, and what they showcase is an important part of what they do. They have a summit around femtech, which is technology addressed to women issues.
I haven't heard femtech. Okay.
Yeah,
I haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
So they've done more things, in response to being called out for, it needs to be more inclusive, and so it was, even though this year post this weird kind of pandemic time frame, that it was a smaller presence than what they've had in the past, but even that, it was still pretty inclusive.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Questions? You're all so quiet this morning. Okay, good. All right. So let's talk a little bit about how you are building your organizations, right? We were talking earlier about how you're having a meeting with a congressperson to get some funding for your new fund. How is there a repository of information? Is it just word of mouth? How do you know who to approach?
Oh my God.
With this goal of creating a more inclusive initiative and campaign and support for minority-owned businesses? How do you do that?
Oh my gosh, that was some of the premise around the TechCrunch article.
Yeah, right.
Is when I started Founders First 6 years ago and said, I'm going to leverage my tech background to focus on this issue. People are like, you're crazy. You can find some other technical problem to solve than that.
Right. Something easier than that.
Something easier than that. And the challenge was, I thought that I could go to people that funded, disruptive solution in tech to fund this issue. Right. And they were like, investors are generally two categories. The majority are financial, returns. And the other, you have the social, which is a smaller group. It's growing, but it's educating people about it's not philanthropy. It is alpha. It is returns, and this is the model that makes that happen. Now the challenge was there wasn't a precedent for doing that. So you have to find, like so many things, who cares about this, and who has a mandate to do this. The challenge is the people who, and there is a group of folks that do, be it foundations, family office, government, and even some of these companies that have had had a social impact related thing. Their treasury departments have made investments, but that money moves at a slower pace than the traditional technology investment. For me, as there's not a whole lot of diverse fund managers, because people invest based on economic models. So they're looking at, well, the people that have provided me this level of returns have done this, had this track record, looked like this, and you're kind of a square peg going into this round hole. Right. So I had to, I was fortunate because of this was my 7th deal, going back to my former investors and said, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Right. Come and take a flyer with me on this small.
But you had done it, several times in the past also. You've shown that track record.
Right. But it took that to attract the slower moving, dollars that, like one of our lead investors is the Rockefeller Foundation. They have done a lot of innovative finance for a long time. And if you look back of where the venture capital community in the Bay Area is today, that was started by the same way. Foundation family offices funded like Sequoia and all these other people 40 years ago. And once they built up a track record, then they were able to attract like the pension fund money and all this other pieces.
But someone used to seed that originally in the beginning. Yeah.
And that's how things happen. And it's not just in the initial, it's the sustainable piece. And this is why you have to demonstrate the market rate returns in order to have that sustainable proof of capital. And it's hard because many people think that it should just be all philanthropic. It should just be just the social good. But the problem is you end up having this constantly Groundhog Day experience that every 10 years we're having the same problem because if it doesn't have that economic outcome.
It is truly all about alpha, right? It is truly all about alpha. And I know your business focuses on how do you generate outsized returns for your investors, as does mine. And there's a lot of noise that exists today, and not bad noise, but there's a lot of people getting funded, that are actually focused on more of a social impact than creating a market rate return and generating impact. And so it's hard to kind of fight through that. There's not a central repository of, hey, this is who is really focused on this space. Not that I found.
That's something we should maybe put together. We should talk about that.
I agree. And I think it is, a lot of it I think is finding those that are passionate about it and connecting with them. Fortunately, Ken had put me in touch with Kim when I moved out here. And just researching what Kim has done allows you to see a little bit of how she has done it and who might be instrumental in this. But it's about getting out to events like this, connecting with people that are also exploring this space, and identifying some, I think, larger conferences or organizations that are focused on this. And it's a new way of thinking, a new place to go. And a lot of times you're going by yourself because that's just how it is, right? There's not a ton of people yet in terms of, there's not a large relative number of our network that is doing this. But you have to get there if you want to expand your market and your understanding, unfortunately.
And the balance of that, of making certain, like there's, in the capital markets, there's lots of infrastructure that educates people about performance, but not on this side. So when you think about the market and the model of your offering, it's not just a function of doing good and allowing your investors to do well. You have to be able to show and report how you did good and do well at the same time. So it's having that balance of making that happen. So it's that education of the market, and my hope is that this is not another Groundhog Day moment, because there's other forces that are driving this piece, but there's, and either you're on the outside kind of, being able to support it, or on the other side. But the cool thing about, just where innovation has gone, there's so many ways for people to be a part of the contribution, part of the conversation, part of contributing to advance this initiative forward. So that it's not a trend, or to take a statement from Hamilton, it's not a moment, but a movement, so that it's much more extended.
Well, if you can invoke a Hamilton into this conversation, I'm pretty impressed. That's good. That's good deal.
I've just been talking a lot about getting this cart down the road. That's it.
Kim, before you arrived, I assured everybody that you're the more interesting part of this panel. So, and then you dropped the Hamilton.
Way to do it. Well, I think, to your point a few minutes ago as well, it's about making sure that it's not Groundhog Day, that it is something that's going to happen on a regular basis. And I don't know what either of you, what you're doing right now or what you're planning on doing, but part of it also is kind of sharing that experience, right? So allowing, for example, some of the folks that are in your program that are minority owners to work together and collaborate, and whether it's a formal mentorship or just collaboration. And as we all hire people that are minorities into our businesses, it's important to kind of set up those mentorship programs, not just based on two people that are in marketing or two folks that are in sales, but let's make sure there's some cultural diversity in that mentorship as well. Are you doing that at all? Do you connect your portfolio company owners?
We tell them that you will not succeed alone, and it's hard because in the systemic environment that they're in, being able to say you want to grow your business to $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, and our aspiration is, like you could say between myself and Kurt's, is to be the bridge. We want to grow these companies to be 10 million so they could grow to be a great candidates for a platform like his. But you won't get there alone, and that just what got you here is not going to get you there, and you have to be able to constantly expand your network, and it's hard.
And be willing to ask for help.
Be willing to ask for help.
It's hard for entrepreneurs.
And take risks. Especially in this environment, it's you could either just really be frustrated because there's the uncertainty of what's happening with the pandemic, and it's like, gosh, how do I connect with customers or new people? But it's like some of the things you've got to just, to persevere and push yourself to do those things, so that, like you have continued your alliance online. That is so important to keep that network going. The cool thing about this pandemic is there's so much online stuff that you can get access to people that you couldn't get access before, and people are responsive on social media than they were before. And the other thing is, don't feel bad about being persistent. Just because you ask to connect with somebody once, it may be that it's a handful of times that you've got to reach out to them. But yes, connecting them with the cohort, connecting them with they also get assigned a coach. But the other key thing for these businesses to succeed, and I think we were talking about this in the video that you did, is to also build alliances. Like there's the whole concept about allyship. Find a mentor who's doing what you want to do, and build that relationship. A mentor and advisor, and it's going to take a while. It may be, hey, can I ask you a question, every once in a while to get your input? They've got to be willing to ask that question. And the hope is the advisor can start with just allocating their time. It may be allocating 30 minutes to an hour, saying, I'm gonna have a cup of coffee with a couple of companies that aspire to grow, 7 figures. And, just connecting with them, that is so valuable because there's so much, like you were talking about experience that they don't have from a business standpoint that is so amazing. And just starting with, if I had to do something over again to get to where I am, this is the 1 or 2 things that I would do different. And that is so powerful, just as much as people think, well, I can't, invest in these companies, but being able to provide advice and mentorship and connections, introductions, is just, just as significant as capital.
That time is everything. That's such a big deal. Yeah. And Kurt, how about yourself in terms of ways to kind of help, I don't know, kind of keep the ball rolling, if you will, right?
Yeah.
To kind of give back.
Well, so I think to give back, leaving what I call Indian country, it was kind of a shock. I was working directly with it for 11 years, and I think in total about 13 years, right? And that was kind of my life. But even there's still a lot of work for Indian country to do. So for me, this actually frees up time so I could, just engage more with different tribes. Being in California more, where there's 109 different tribes, has allowed me to just connect a little bit more to some tribes out here, as well as in Michigan. But kind of higher level, really what I'm trying to do is reduce the search costs for corporations that want to add more diverse talent to their boards. And the reason why is because I have seen the personal benefit from being in those rooms. When you're sitting next to billionaires, right, they have access to a lot. And if they're in that room, hopefully they have passion for what it is that they're doing. And they want to help others that share a similar passion as what they're doing. And it's a very challenge. I mean, that's one of the systemic barriers that we talk about. I also believe that in order to accelerate change, it starts at the large governance level, whether it's institutional or for-profit corporations, and there's more need, than ever for diverse talent to join boards. Everybody knows about California. I'm sure you're getting fined today if you don't have diverse talent on your boards. The NASDAQ, if you don't have diversity in your board, you have to write a public letter that says why you can't add diversity to your boards, right? Which I think is probably worse than a monetary fine.
Yeah, I agree.
And I believe that Include Capital and myself can help, accelerate that. And I think which not only, again, creates a network effect, it benefits the business, but I think it's going to benefit all of us, truly. So it's one of the ways that I give back. I also volunteer just a lot of time the amount of times I say yes to people that ask me for help. I mean, I met Kim on a call, and not that Kim was asking me for help, but there was an opening on her Founders First CDC nonprofit. I think mostly because I split time between the Midwest and here, that it made me a good candidate to help out. But I see what Kim is doing and her firm is doing, and I love everything about it because it's about generating investment returns as well as the impact side. One of the largest national banks has engaged me to help them with some DEI initiatives. And although I hope that there's some mutual benefit, on the fund side, but the reality is that who knows, but they're passionate about the same things that I am, and I just really enjoy, working with it. So those are some ways that I'm giving back today. But I do truly think the more that you kind of take that step forward and put yourself out there, you get recognized from people when you're genuinely doing things, for the public and social good. But you got to be genuinely interested in it and find the piece that you're genuinely interested in. For me, it was Indian country, right? That was 11 plus years. And then I became focused a little more on expanding that. And, but that's what it inspired me to do this. And so I think at the end of the day, you talk about what could you do differently. When I graduated college, it was about money, right? Because I grew up in a poor family. I wanted money. I wanted to be able to travel and do the things that rich people could afford to do. And that deterred, I think it slowed the path for my progress where I eventually got to. But it's also, I'll end with this, it's also because I couldn't envision as a young kid, as a dumb 20-something-year-old, just out of college kid, I couldn't envision myself in the private equity world actually allocating capital and acquiring companies. And if you can't envision it, it's tough to ever think about getting on the path to get there. And
if you don't see examples of it around you also.
You have to see the examples. We talk about that a lot at Western Michigan University, and especially with a medical school. And how do we engage youth? And there's different ways to do it, but really you have to find something that you can see yourself getting excited about. Even if it's a small step, that will then just compound as you meet more and more people.
Yeah. Great. Any last questions? Ending. First of all, as you can tell, don't take yourself too seriously. Have some fun with this stuff, right? But on the other hand, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and ask the questions. I don't know what to do. I don't know. I have a passion for this. I'm genuinely, interested in doing a better job as an organization, as a connector, whatever it is. But I don't know how to do it. What do you recommend? And you have some good insights. You might have other people that have insights as well. So don't be afraid to ask. You might feel embarrassed at first to say, I don't know this, especially as entrepreneurs, as business leaders. We have a hard time asking for help, as we all know. But there's no way we're going to make any difference and really have an impact unless we do get out of our comfort zone. So I encourage you all to definitely do that. Are you guys available on social media, on LinkedIn, for folks to reach out and connect?
LinkedIn is the best way of connecting with me. And we have, through our platform, we have 12 pitch events a year throughout the country. So that's always a great way to get connected and see what some of the companies are. And actually, starting this year, we're live streaming those because we do allow for a hybrid for people to participate. So, it's a way for people to dip their toe in and just kind of see, what that's like.
Like you said before, people have more access to things online. It's great for introductions. Yeah, very good. All right, good. So please join me in thanking our panel.